right, everyone. Hello. My name is Darren Michaels. I am the host of this Scott Labs webinar series where we discuss interesting topics and try and answer questions related to wine, cider, or specialty beverage production. From yeast to nutrients to stabilization and filtration, we dip into the Scott Labs vault of over 80 years of experience to bring you the latest in research and technical applications. Today, I'm very excited. We have with us Annamarie Howard and her presentation about sluggish and stuck ML fermentations. This is going to be kind of a different format. Normally we do a deep dive where we're like, this is, yeast functionality, and then these are the aromas and the terpenes and all this other stuff. But because of the timing, it's mid-December, I thought it'd be better if we workshop this kind of. And so we're doing this in a more of an open conversation with Ani. So this presentation that she has, it's about 10 or 15 slides. And it's kind of like a technical support presentation. So it's literally the questions that you'll be asked if you call and you say you have issues with your ML fermentation. So we're assuming, to start this presentation, we're going to go with the assumption that you're pretty much convinced that your ML is not going well, or if you've had issues in the past, this is kind of the questions you want to ask yourselves. But it's really like how to move forward, and it's very technical, open conversation based. Okay. So this talk, I just thought, like I said, with the holidays coming up, to focus on technical support and approach this in a processing step way, and so you don't have to stress too much about the eggnogging when it comes time to hit Christmas and the holidays. So here's a quick bio in case you don't know Ani. She graduated from the University of California, Davis in 1986 with a BS in fermentation science and an emphasis in enology. Right after that, she sold wine. That's built some credibility. And then after working some harvest in Napa winery, she started working for Chris Hansen and actually helped introduce the first direct inoculation ML cultures in the wine industry. And eventually we were lucky enough to have her join Scott Labs in 2004. And she's currently the bacteria sales manager, covering technical sales of enology fermentation products, but with a focus specializing malolactic bacteria. She's the one you want to call when you've got any kind of question, and with her history and credibility, I mean, you can ask her anything. And she's very much process driven. So, it's going to be about helping you get through the process, especially having issues, because it is different when you have a stuck ML fermentations versus a stuck primary fermentation. She worked first in Napa, then she moved down the Paso Robles in support of the Central Coast. And then in 2019, she moved back up to the Northern California. And after providing some technical support to the Central Coast. So in an area, she loves the Central Coast, but there's no place like home. So as usual during the talk, I'll be posting several quick polls for you to answer. Since this is kind of an open conversation, I'll be shoving them in as best I can. And as always, make sure you can see the audio settings on the lower left along the bottom, the raise hand and the Q&A buttons. These will be your main channels for communication. If you have any questions that occur to you during the talk, feel free to post the questions on the Q&A section, and we will try and answer those questions after the presentation. And your questions will be anonymous. Same thing with the polling. The polling's anonymous too. I'll also be looking for raised hands if you'd like to ask your question live. We'll be recording this webinar. We're recording it right now, making it available to you in case you need to run, or in case you're not in this right now and you missed it and you want to watch it. Hopefully, thank you for watching it again. And it'll be available on our website and with any of the topics discussed. And I've said this before, and it's kind of something I've really embraced over the years, that winemaking feels like herding cats because it's really so microbially based. And especially when it comes into sluggish ML fermentations, and those cats are sometimes real lazy. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Ani. Ani, how's it going?
It's going well, Darren. Thanks for having me on this webinar series. I feel like I'm in good company, that we had Maggie and we had Nicola, and we have a really, really great technical team. So I'm proud to be part of this venue, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. I wish I could see all of you right now. I heard my buddy Randy was going to be on this call and maybe some other friends, but hi there. Wish I could see your shiny face. So here we go. From the beginning. That's not the beginning. Here we are. So nothing says the holidays like diagnosing and restarting a stuck ML, huh, Darren?
Yeah, right.
So hopefully you don't have one. But if you do have one and you call either the inside technical staff or you call me, we're going to be asking you a whole bunch of questions. And it's really just to figure out what's going on in the wine. You know, it's kind of like when you call your Apple computer and they want to ask you a bunch of questions about what's going on with your computer. So with the wine, what type of wine is it? You know, a lot of Chardonnay fermentations are tough for malolactic fermentation. Merlots are often, those are the two most common when I ask people how their MLs went. Oh, I had a stuck Chardonnay or I had a stuck Merlot. So I just want to know what variety it is. Is the primary fermentation dry? Just get more of a full picture. If the primary fermentation isn't dry and ML isn't dry, we're going to go into a deep dive on what's going on there. Next, what's the temperature? To be honest, most of the time it's the temperature or the free and total SO2 that's the problem. So 68 degrees optimum, but in harvest it gets cold. You know, once November, December comes along, you know, it gets chilly in the cellar. So under 68, it's not going to kill the bacteria to be really cold. It's just going to be really slow.
Yeah, it's like, you know, we get cold right away after primary fermentation. And it's part of the reason why we do Co-Inoc is because we simply can't we don't have a place to warm the fermentations after primary.
Yeah. You know, hey, it looks like Pete has a question. Are we going to take the questions as we go?
No, I usually wait to the end.
Okay. All right, Pete, we'll talk to you in a little bit.
Yeah, we'll talk to you a little bit.
So what is the measured free and total SO2? Darren, why won't they measure the free and total SO2? When I ask them, they say, oh, you know, I just added 20 to 30 parts of the crusher. It's fine.
We talked about this before. Yeah, it's like, I know why I kind of avoid it. I mean, I really do think that it's scary to get the result back because, you know, it's happened enough where I'm like, oh no, you know, what's the total? And it's like, look at the temperature. Did we inoculate it from L? Is the alcohol too high? And it's almost like total sulfur is like, I'm resistant to getting that number because it's kind of like not game over, but I don't want to see an 80 or 90 total sulfur, even when I think I didn't add any sulfur at all.
I know. And that's happened before. You know, I've asked people to please check the free and total SO2 and call me back with it. And the total will be like 80 and they have no idea how. So that I don't either. And that's a whole nother conversation, but it's a really good idea to have that number.
Yeah.
So more questions that we're going to ask to get a complete picture. What's the pH in alcohol? So over 3.5 pH is going to be easiest and alcohol under 15%. It depends on what bacteria strain you're going to use. And all those chemistries work in synergy. So if you called me and you had a wine and you said, Ani, my pH is 3.1 and my alcohol is 16, well, that's going to be really tough.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, you might not be able to get it to go through. Oh, is that, excuse me?
Dial more with the Malic, the scorecard too with that.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So what ML bacteria did you add and how did you add it? So I just want to make sure that you're not using the small pack, the 2.5 hectoliter, 66 gallon on 6,000 gallons of wine, or that you opened the pack last harvest and left it in your lab for a year, or all kinds of different scenarios. I just want to know, what kind of, or did you add bacteria? Maybe you didn't add it and it's time to. So
I've had that. We talked about that where we've had a client that was like not adding the correct amount. And I think it was cost, they were worried about cost, but they were trying to spin it in a way that was like, I like the complexity, but I'm like, I don't think you're trying to drive the complexity. I think you just don't want to, you want to save on the money, but in the end, it was so difficult to go through ML at that point. The dosage was so low. I was like, I don't count it as inoculation.
Yeah. And if you're not going to, it has to have a critical mass of 1 million cells per mil. And if you're just letting it sit there with a really low population, you can get oxidation, you can have Brett start to grow. So it's a good idea to do a full inoculation. Yeah. So, what yeast strain did you use? So in our handbook, right in the beginning there, what's it start on page like 11, something like that?
Yeah.
In our yeast charts, it says whether a yeast strain is going to be ML friendly or not. So some yeast strains can produce SO2, some can be high nutrient demand. I'm not saying not to use those. It's just to know before you're adding your bacteria on what you're going to get into.
I mean, it's page 11, 12, 13, 14 in the 2020 handbook. And we talked about this before. I was surprised to find when I first saw this, I was surprised to find BM 4x4 as listed as, below average. I mean, I haven't ever had issues with that. It's one of my favorite yeast strains ever. But I could have been because I've been, nutrifying correctly, using the right nutrients. I never really had any issues because I didn't give it much reason to have issues.
Exactly. But if you use a high nutrient demand strain and don't add a proper, don't do a proper nutrition strategy, you could have problems later on.
Yeah.
So, and how are you checking the malic acid? I didn't used to ask people that question. And then one time somebody said, oh, I put my ear down and I was hearing the snap, crackle, pop, and it stopped, snap, crackling, and popping. So I think it's stuck. I go, well, maybe it's done. And they were surprised that it was done. So then I started asking people, how are you checking it? I mean, there are some amazing people out there that can taste, amazing things. I don't think you can check that 0.1 gram per liter malic is dry.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, you probably could, Darren. I cannot. So you might want to check it with the spectrophotometer.
Yeah, honestly, on a practical basis, I mean, chromatography is pretty standard. We're looking for that dot. If you see the dot there,
right.
You're not done probably. But yeah, I mean, it's so hard to get folks sometimes to try and measure enzymatically because it's really the best way to do it. At least right now, it is. Yeah. And yeah, I've had that conversation where folks were actually convinced they could taste the malic. But at like I said, 0.1, 0.2 gram, 0.3 grams per liter. It is just probably, if they can, it's a crazy good palate.
Right.
Because, it's quite a sensitivity at that level, to verify. I always
just send it out.
Yeah, send it out, please. Yeah.
or check it yourself.
Yeah.
Because you want to add SO2 once it's done. So then you protect it and then you can go off to your holidays. Yeah. So what about ML nutrients? Do you need to add it every time? Bacteria have specific needs for certain amino acids, and if they're missing, it could be a problem, especially in limiting conditions. But if you have a high nutrient demand yeast, if your YAN was low, if you didn't add yeast nutrients, you might need to add some ML nutrients. Lallemand did a study looking at different peptide fractions, and it led to the development of Optimala Blanc for Chardonnay and for ML Red Boost for Merlot. That is a little more protective of some of the phenolics. So we do have some really good options. It's not usually needed in a co-inoculation because the bacteria can get what it needs from the added yeast nutrition that you're going to be using.
Yeah, and you found too that, we talked about this before too, you found too, kind of like rescue in a sluggish primary fermentation, oftentimes just adding this, if you're pretty sure you're sluggish for ML, just adding it sometimes will be enough to push it through.
Right, exactly. Yeah, rescue is a great product. So just like a primary fermentation, when it's stuck or sluggish, using rescue can be really helpful in malolactic fermentation too.
Yeah.
And it's also that you're stirring it and moving things around too. So that's really helpful. So other inhibitory factors, malic levels that are either very low or very high. I heard that in Napa that malic levels were really low this year. And that could be a problem if you have a sluggish fermentation and the malic, is gone. Then the bacteria uses the malic acid and then the citric acid, and then can start using sugars. The pH is over 3.5. So low malic acid levels can be problematic, and really high malic levels can be tough too. So, in the Midwest and back east, they can have high, like up to 7 grams per liter can be tough. Yeah. And also the reason for that is because lactic acid can be inhibitory to bacteria. Yeah. So 1.5 grams per liter can slow down an ML, and over 3 grams per liter can really start to inhibit it.
Yeah, back east especially, and some spots in the Central Coast, I'd seen values of incoming malics at 6 grams per liter, and it's it's part of the reason probably that they're going to sometimes have had issues, and it's important not to illustrate this, especially if you're in the Midwest, you're dealing with American or hybrid cultivars, that on page 15 and 16 of our 2020 handbook, it has a line there that talks about reducing malic content, and the big ones are 71B, Mosaic, Opal 2.0, and one not listed on that page, but on the page before is VRB. And yeah, honestly, when I'm dealing with folks that are, east of the West, that are coming in with some pretty high malics, and they really do want to go through ML, at least a partial ML, that you go ahead and do your primary part of your decision making and picking your yeast. I recommend is to pick one of those strains, VRB,
Yep.
71B, Mosaic. And actually, yeah, there's been studies that's been carried out years ago in Chardonnay that showed differing degrees of malic acid degradation. And some of the big ones was like 43 and Rowan 226. And so I do think it's important to consider that when you're talking about going through, you're going to try and push something through ML that might end up coming in at a high malic, is to at least consider, maybe a higher consuming malic strain.
Yeah, choosing your yeast strain based on that. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Another problem that can happen is using chitosan. Our product is bactulus, but if you want ML to go through, don't use a chitosan product before ML is done. If you have a stuck primary and you want to knock back that Enococcus population, if your winery can use something like lysozyme, some are limited on what they can use, but it would be better if you wanted to go through later to use lysozyme. Chitosan is great. It's a great antimicrobial, but it's going to be tough for ML.
Yeah, we got that question, starting a couple years ago, at least up here, Pacific Northwest. There was a rumor that lysozyme would no longer be available, which is not true. I mean, it's still available, but the thought was you could replace that with judicious use of chitosan, it's just not advisable. If you've got a high pH must coming in and you want to try and control some, for spoilage organisms or lactic acid bacteria, we still recommend, if anything, using lysozyme, because the chitosan could inhibit or at least, push off your eventual ML fermentation. It's just not something we recommend.
I mean, you might be able to use a little bit of bentonite, but I wouldn't recommend it. It'd be better to not use it.
Yeah.
Another inhibitory factor is medium chain unsaturated fatty acids, and that's where the rescue can come in. So other inhibitory factors, lees compaction. So maybe you just need to warm it up and stir it. That would be great if that's all you needed to do. The bacteria is there, and it just has settled down into the lees. So there's the pulling. And the pesticide residue, was I supposed to leave that up, Darren, or is that okay that I closed it? Can people still see the polling?
You can close it. Yeah, it's
still going. Okay, great.
Yep.
So pesticide residue, there's been a couple situations when the alcohol wasn't too high, the pH wasn't too low, SO2 wasn't too low. There was a situation in New York. There was one in Texas. It's happened in California. And we could not figure out why the ML wasn't going. So I had them send in a sample to ETS for the fungicide and the pesticide spray. And this boscalid came back as being one of the compounds. And it is inhibitory to malolactic fermentation. So if nothing else seems, you can't figure out why it's inhibiting it, you might try sending out a sample to ETS. Certain phenolic compounds, condensed tannins, can inhibit malolactic fermentation. So that's where ML Red Boost came in. And as a sidebar, anthocyanins can be stimulatory to malolactic fermentation. Another lesser known inhibitory factor is copper sulfate spray in organic vineyards. But that doesn't really seem to be too much of a problem because the level has to be pretty high in order to inhibit yeast or bacteria. So now there we go. Okay, sorry, it wasn't going down for a second there. Okay, so one tool that we have from Lallemand is an ML scorecard. And what you can do is you can look at the different characteristics of the wine and add up the points for them and see whether an ML is going to be favorable or extreme. So here's one that's filled out for 2016 Grossman Sang, a French wine. And you're looking at the alcohol. So if it's under 13%, you're only going to put one, score one in the column over here. And if it's over 17%, that's going to be really tough. Then you're going to add 10 points. So you go through each one of these and you score it. So your pH, free SO2, total SO2, the temperature, yeast nutritional needs. So in this case, they didn't have all the information, but they had enough to figure out that this ML was not so favorable. So they're going to have to adapt, do some sort of adaptation, maybe rescue in order to get it to go through. So depending on your score, it could be either favorable, you can add direct inoculation strain, any of our MBR strains, and it'll go through fine. Go all the way down to not so favorable, difficult, or extreme for malolactic fermentation. So another tool that you can use is the quick ML test. And we can do this in our lab, but right now with COVID, it's kind of tough. Corinne it's hard for her to get to everything. So we can send this to you and you can do it in your own lab. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to check the Malic, and you're going to add either VP41 or alpha, and you're going to be measuring it after 48 to 72 hours and see how much Malic has been used up. So if you've used from 60 to 100% of the Malic up within that 48 hours in your mini test, direct inoculation is possible. So you can add any of our MBR cultures and that should work fine. If you have from 20 to 60% Malic degradation within that 48 hours, then it is possible, but you're going to have to do a detox. So use of rescue, ML Red Boost, VP41, and you'll be able to get that to go through. If you only have 0 to 20% of the Malic degradation during that time, it's going to be really difficult, maybe impossible to get through. You can try doing a standard buildup, which is kind of a pain. You might just want to give up. It depends. We can walk you through it. This is also on the Lallemand app. If you have the Lallemand app, this is for sure the ML scorecard. I'm pretty sure the ML test is, and if it isn't, let me know and I'll email it to you.
Yeah.
So Darren, how do you do a restart? Have you ever had to do one of these, ML restart?
I've said this, I've said this before. I mean, for me, like compared to primary fermentation, ML to me is like my least favorite fermentation sometimes, because
now.
it seems but I will honestly say doing restarting a stuck Malic fermentation on the level of difficulty is much lower. Like,
yeah,
that you just don't need to do the P2Q kind of, buildup.
Exactly. So on this, you're going to start out the same as you do with the primary stuck fermentation. Is you're going to be adding 30 grams per hectoliter of rescue. It is different with yeast. You're going to be using 40 grams per hectoliter of rescue. But with ML, you only need about 30 grams per hectoliter. You want to suspend it in 10 times its weight in warm water, so 86 to 98 degree water. And then you're going to be racking off after that after 48 hours. Then you're going to be adding ML Red Boost. And you're going to add that whether it's a red, white, or rosé wine. ML Red Boost, it seems to be the best when you're doing a restart. And yeah. Lallemand has analyzed their restart procedure. Every couple of years, they do a whole study about it. And it's changed over the years. And I like that about them. They don't just propose one thing and that's the answer. They reevaluate it and see which is the best. And this is the most recent restart protocol that is working the best. So ML Red Boost, wait 24 hours, and then you add your bacteria. You're going to be adding double the dose of VP41. So the direct inoculation VP41, you're just going to do double the dose on that. And then check Malic every 2 to 4 days and to see when it's done. And hopefully within, a couple weeks, hopefully a month or so, it'll be finished. So that's it. Pretty simple.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I want to point out, I mean, it's something that we touched on before about adding, one of the questions you might get if you call up and like I said, can't stress this enough. We've got people not waiting around, but we've got people online, that can help if you are having some questions about stuff, even if you're not sure, if you just want to talk it through. But one of the things we'll ask is, did you add the right amount of ML bacteria? And to a point here, we kind of suggested this before, it's not quite the same level of a P2Q buildup, where you're having to do like you do for restart stuck fermentation, which is oftentimes, an adaptation to a standard tirage buildup, which is where you're trying to build up a population of yeast that have been accustomed to difficult conditions. So, unless you're using something like 43 Restart, which is adapted specifically to go into higher alcohol concentrations, you're going to be doing this build up, waiting for the bricks to drop. But you can, I could see it right now with this conversation. Like, this is not going to be, I'm not going to be standing around, buying a cot waiting for my bricks to drop for a
Right.
ml, right?
Right.
And like, but doubling the dose, that could save you a bunch of effort, because it's just, right, it's not going to quite grow and build to the same extent that the bacteria just does not behave in the same way that a primary fermentation yeast does. Correct?
Right. And also, if it's stuck, there's something that's there that's causing a problem. So hopefully you've prepped the wine through the rescue and the ML Red Boost, and it's going to be ready to go. So
yeah, and we talked about this before too. Like when somebody calls you and it's like, say it's in February or March, for instance, and they're suspicious of the stuck ML. I mean, what's been your experience with dealing with like a later aged wine? I mean, have you seen it overall, this procedure be successful in starting something that might have, maybe just not got enough attention, or maybe
yeah, I mean,
forgotten?
honestly, it still could be temperature at that point. If it's gotten really cold in November or December and has not warmed up at all. I mean, you hear the stories in France of when they say, oh, when the vine blooms. I can't do a French accent. Sorry for all you French people, but
Thank you.
When the vines bloom, the ML goes through because it's this beautiful synergy. And well, really, it's just warmed up because it's spring. But so if it's as simple as that, it's great. People, get really creative with, fish tank heaters and, space heaters and electric blankets, and do all kinds of things if they wanted to get through. So
yeah, I mean, space, fish, I do recommend you guys, if you're thinking about doing a fish tank heater, you go well, nowadays you can go online. Nowadays, I sound like an old person, but you can go online and find appropriate sized wattage or voltage, wattage, I think it is, fish tanks. So or fish tank heaters. So keep in mind, you're dealing with like a 60-gallon volume of liquid. And you pick a space heater that's going to be comparable for that, and it fits into the bunghole of the barrel. But you can do that, though. I mean, I definitely have done space heaters. I've definitely done, Ani, you mentioned going out and buying. Did somebody go out and buy like every single heated blanket in the
I have heard people using electric blankets.
Yeah. Oh, Michael mentioned that. He went out at Shandong, and
oh, yes,
every single like heated blanket in the area of Napa.
Right. And then they gave it away to the homeless. So it was a win-win.
Yeah. And pretty much anything you can do. I mean, I've worked with plenty of producers that have basically put the bung in the barrel and put it in their cellar, and basically weren't going to check it again in April, which is, very French to do it that way. On a practical production sense, the only drawback I've found in that experience has been in situations where they were leaning high on the pHs, and so they were kind of promoting homofermentative enococcus, or homofermentative enococcus. So for basically, they were kind of promoting, unknowingly promoting growth of non-ideal enococcus. And so after enough years, it was not atypical to find coming back that they then had an endemic, population of not a great lactic acid bacteria, to the point where, horror stories of them taking over maybe in a sluggish ferment, and then finding themselves with very high VAs, stuck wines, prominent Enococcus eni populations, which are not commercial, they weren't produced in a commercial way, and having to go back through and basically redesign their sterilization technique. And it's something I really stress with students, not so much for larger winery clients, but, medium to small starting clients, is the importance of cleaning. I hate to say that, it's just a separate conversation, but when it comes to these rogue lactic acid bacteria fermentations, they're typically related to a lapsed stringent cleaning regimen, to be
Yeah.
honest with
And if you do have a cleaning protocol, put that in place. And places like Oregon State University have done a lot of work at how added bacteria can be a biocontrol against Brettanomyces. So if you add a really strong culture of added bacteria, Enococcus, it can, keep down other cultures. So as other, excuse me, not cultures, but other, things like Brettanomyces, other microbes. So
there's the questions pop up before, and I'll ask it now. What about utilizing, if you want to control for some maybe rogue behavior, or maybe increase Acetobacter, and this is not really kind of your wheelhouse, but it does suggest to me of a non-sac inoculation early on, Tulurospora, Meschlicovia, Gaia.
Gaia, yep.
Yes, help with these kind of considerations. You're not producing the toxin, you're not producing the mid-chain fatty acids, but you're also protecting against some rogue material that when you go in, Malic, you're not starting up with a high VA to begin with. You know what I mean?
Right. And also some of those non-sacs, not, well, some of the ones that we actually add too, but a lot of the ones like Clecra and others, they can take up a lot of nutrients and micronutrients that can inhibit both yeast and bacteria later on down the line. So it's good to keep everything clean, and it's good to watch what you have going on that's coming in on your fruit with rot. You might want to increase your SO2. I mean, I know we're getting into other things, but then it looks like there's some questions up there, Darren, too.
Yeah, let's do that. Let me hit some Q&As because they're starting to stack up. First question. Do you have a research for what to do with a stuck primary if the whole rescue Uberform 40 restart didn't work? We do. This is kind of laying into primary fermentation. You can reach out. My email is darrenm@scottlab.com. I can kind of help you walk you through that. We'll have to go through the number one thing with that question is going to be, if you don't have it, actually, Ani, if you want to go back to your MLF scorecard really quick, and we can look at some of the parameters that we ask for, what's at least something that's going to be, see, there you go. I mean, that list right there. One that's not listed there because it's not as important as the outcome is VA. So when you're talking about a stuck primary, I just went through this conversation the other day with someone in Napa. They sent me the numbers, and it was pretty clear that the VA was real elevated. And I had that another question with a client yesterday, and that had a stuck uninoculated apple juice fermentation, cider fermentation. And they were like, how do you do a restart? How do you do a restart? And I'm like, well, before we get started, before you make that investment in time and effort, get your VA tested at least.
Yeah, because anything above 0.8 grams per liter is going to be really hard on the yeast to do a restart.
Yeah, and the cider guy was I've had a number of questions this year, and unfortunately, some of the folks that have gotten back to me have shown VAs of 1.5, 1.4 gram per liter, and it's at the point where I'm like, well, you might have to look at that beverage in a different way, but you'll have to do, VA removal before you can start that. And of course, that's totally off subject here, but I wanted to answer.
Well, I was just going to say, even sometimes if you just remove the VA, the primary will finish up. Remove the VA, add some rescue, and you don't even have to go through the whole restart again.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point.
That's a
and
a
you're
lot of people are dealing with it
through ML. So if that wine's going to go through ML in addition to finishing your primary, it's probably best to target a lower VA, 0.5, 0.6 grams per liter.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times with the stuck primary, the first questions you're going to ask is, what's the VA, and is the Malic still there, and is the pH over 3.5?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a great comparison to the previous presentation where we talked about stuck primaries. I mean, part of the reason why this is kind of a short presentation is because the stuck ML presentation protocol it's not as hard as it would be to do a P to Q, for a primary. So I do think it's important for folks to look at that MLF scorecard and to go through that and those questions. We do, it's been enough time to know that Chardonnay seems to have a problem, for whatever reason. Chardonnay, right? I mean, Chardonnay's biggest Achilles heel.
That's right.
Right? Achilles heel? I don't think I
Yeah.
have that right.
Achilles
Okay,
tendon? No.
yeah. Okay, second question. My question is about temperature. How warm is too warm?
Well, if you're doing a co-inoculation and it's getting up around 90 degrees, your bacteria is going to be starting to die off.
Okay.
So that's
So
really
90
the only time you're going to get too high, because in your cellar, you're not going to get, too high. So in a sequential inoculation, if it could be around, 68 degrees, that's great. So to answer the question, hopefully I'm answering what they're asking. Around 90, especially if there's alcohol there, the bacteria is going to start dying off. So in a co-inoculation, that can happen.
And I can't help but notice on the MLF scorecard again that you've got a temperature there of 29 degrees Celsius, which is about 84 degrees Fahrenheit. So,
Right.
once you're above that temperature, it's going to be a little tough. You know what I mean? Is paper chromatography an acceptable method to check your malic acid level?
Absolutely. Also, because then you can see that the lactic one is going up and the malic one is going down. And so, yeah, it's perfectly acceptable. You just don't have a final number to know that it's completely dry. You can kind of see it. But yeah, paper chromatography is great. You might, when it looks like it's done, you might want to send it out to a lab to just see if you're down around 0.1 gram per liter.
Yeah, so it's not really a great, I'll say this to students too. It's chromatography is what it is. It's an identification of acids. It's not a quantification.
Right.
So so if you're not seeing a dot, it's probably a good time to get it verified, or move forward with that idea. If you're still seeing a dot, and especially if you're seeing lactic acid being about the same intensity, but that's qualitative and not quantitative. I can't stress that enough.
Right.
What happens if you don't rack off the rescue? Have you been successful? What will happen?
I know a lot of people ask that just because they either don't have something to rack into, or we have found that it is best if you do it. So I think it's just like any fining, or with rescue, it's absorptive. So when things are absorbing, eventually they can come unabsorbed. That's not very technical, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No,
so it is best if you can rack off after 48 hours. So, or ish. Sometimes people have to go an extra day because a weekend, or they have the staff on a certain day. But if you can rack off after 48 hours, we have found that works the best.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, we talked about this, and it happened again every year. It's the same thing. They call me, especially in Washington, higher pHs, higher bricks, maybe potential. This year is a great year outside of the smoke. It's fantastic vintage in Washington. And, but like, they're kind of sluggish on the end, and I'm like, just add the rescue. And it's surprising when it just goes. Then it just finishes.
Yeah.
And I think too, we talked about this with rescue, right? For even without the racking off, it seemed to help. But on top of that, we mentioned this before. We absolutely recommend racking off of it, which kind of makes sense because it's supposed to be binding and it's a specialized product. Rescue is really a signature product when it comes to measuring its efficacy of mid-chain fatty acid binding when you compare to like basically yeast salts. But I'll say this, that the ML nutrient, right? Like, who wants to go through a whole ML restart, even though it's not as hard as a primary? Sometimes I'll just be like, have you added ML nutrient?
Right.
No. I'm like, just add that.
That could be the limiting factor.
Right.
Right. And then you don't have to spend the money on the bacteria if that is it.
And like a little, and even to the point of adding a little rescue with the ML nutrient, even though, we definitely recommend racking it off. You can see it sometimes at kickoff a little bit, but not to the same rate. I said this before. It's like, for me, ML fermentation is like, it's not as straightforward as a primary fermentation. You know what I mean? So it's like, it sometimes seems to go in bits and spurts, right?
Right. It is a little more subtle.
Yeah. Yeah. What is the increase in survival factor of the BP41 ml culture when using direct inoculation versus preparing in distilled water? That's a good question.
Yeah. You can add directly. To putting it into water first is mainly for dispersion. It's mainly to get it, well mixed. Sibylla has this great story that she was in Australia, and she and the winemaker go to the top of the tank, and it was really windy, and they opened up one of those big packs, the 250-gram packs, and went like this, and the bacteria just was blown away. It did not go in the tank. In that case, putting in water first would have been a great idea. Okay. So it's mainly for how well you can mix it in. So you can rip open the package, pour it in, or if it's easier for you because of logistics to put it in water first, but the survival rate will be the same.
Okay, yeah. And what about distilled water versus not, like, just filtered water? Do we prefer filtered water?
Oh, yes. I think there was something about distilled water.
Yeah.
That you're supposed to use just regular water.
Yeah, we generally, especially, generally for other inoculations, we generally recommend not
non-chlorinated.
Yeah, it's the chlorine especially is the issue.
Right.
And from my memory, bacteria worse, harder than yeast, but we don't recommend generally distilled. That
True.
we actually prefer, filtered, right?
Yeah.
And chlorine free, but not distilled. What is the limit of addition for rescue and other inactivated yeast products in total? May not be able to add rescue if have already reached the limit. That's a 246 status product list, and let me look that up. I think off the top of my head, it's 8 pounds per thousand. Nicola happens to be on the call.
I know, Nicola, what is it?
Did you happen to...
She would know.
Nicola happens to be
off the top of her head.
She knows that. But on the top of my head, it's 8 pounds per thousand. Any kind of the regulatory questions, so Google that. That's
what I think she just answered, Darren. Did you say something, Nicola?
Oh, Nicola, yeah, go ahead.
I did yeast. If you use regular yeast hulls, you are the limit of regular yeast hulls, which is different, as Darren explained, from rescue, 3 pounds per thousand. So there you go. The autolyzed yeast, not an issue, used with good manufacturing practices.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for being a panelist. If my free sulfur is 20 parts per million, what options would you suggest to lower to 10 parts per million? My situation, I have a 59-gallon barrel of 2019 cab from Sassoon that is about 1 gram per liter of malic acid I want to treat before bottling. My problem is that the threshold for free sulfur for my malolactic culture, Lallemand VP41, is 10 parts per million, but my wine is at 20 parts per million. To my knowledge, there are 2 options available in my home winery. One is to treat with hydrogen peroxide, and the other is to rack while promoting as much aeration as possible. Since use of hydrogen peroxide is illegal and leads to oxidation, I'm wondering if there are any other options, since racking that involves aeration will also lead to an increase in oxygen in the wine. What if your free sulfur is too high? What do you generally recommend?
Blending, but I don't know if they have the option to do that.
Hydrogen
peroxide is not legal.
Yeah.
So home winemakers can use hydrogen peroxide as super stripping. So unfortunately, blending. What are some of your other options? You might lose a little bit through racking, but not. I don't know.
Peroxide is not, the way to go typically. I have been successful in racking though, and I know that's aeration, but I have been successful in moving the wine around, and in a pinch, and it's worked. And I don't worry too much about aldehydic production right now because it's still going to go through ML, so I'm not super worried. I don't want to oxidize the heck out of the wine, but
right.
I don't mind. What I do recommend, actually, now I think about it, is go ahead and pull the sample and mix it in a bottle and measure the free sulfur, and you'd be surprised how much it can change or not change. So if you're worried about too much action to the wine, and you found that you've and I know it's kind of goofy, it's not very scientific at all, so I want to give you that disclaimer. But having a bottle that's halfway empty mixing it up, measuring the free sulfur after a day or two. And if it seems very sensitive to that action, it might be a very good candidate of simply racking it. If it doesn't do anything, you do have kind of a little bit of a condition on it in that way. And it's going to be tougher, but it's worth a try. If you really do want to go through MLs, go ahead and do that. Like I said, total goofy, but 20 years in the business, it's like, I need to get this stuff done, right?
Right.
Does that make sense to you?
And sometimes, Darren, you can't. Sometimes it's just impossible.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. One of the problems with newer heated blankets is they turn on after 10 to 12 hours if intended use is for the bedroom. Very good point. Thank you for that comment. They do turn off. So
I know. I've also wondered about having something, electricity plugged in with extension cords in your cellar with water and everything. That doesn't sound like a great idea, but I have heard the people doing it.
Yeah. So. What about PN4 versus VP41? When do you recommend PN4 over VP41?
You mean in a restart or?
No, just in general. That's the question.
So stylistically, I would choose PN4 if I was in a white and I wanted some creaminess in a sequential inoculation. VP41 has really low diacetyl, and PN4 in a sequential inoculation, you can get some nice creamy, buttery components to it. They call it the rocket PN4. I mean, VP41 is also very fast, but people like it in reds as well. Different flavor profile than VP41. So mainly the first thing that comes up is the whites when I'm thinking about PN4.
Okay. Yeah, we had that discussion internally too about diacetyl production, how actually that important is to produce a butter aroma. And I don't think there is a little bit of work out there, as far as figuring that out, because I don't think that's as a solid correlation as people think it is.
Right, because we do have strains like beta and PN4 that are highest diacetyl producers, but when you're analyzing a buttery wine, there seems to be other components like oak that can bring that butteriness out.
Yeah.
So
what about spontaneous malolactic fermentation? Somebody had mentioned they'd seen a bit of it this year, more than normal. What's been your experience with that? With seeing more spontaneous.
It just depends on what's going on in the vineyard. If there's a higher rot year, you can bring in a lot more bacteria. I heard from a couple people that they were saying that Rich DiCenzo said there was higher levels of Lactobacillus cunkii this year, which can cause stuck fermentations. So, we're not working with a model solution. That's a lot of times people will say, I had the exact same wine last year and it worked fine, and this year it's not. And every year it's different. That's what makes winemaking so amazing and great.
Yeah,
it's different
and frustrating. And
frustrating. Yeah. Yeah. So I do have people say that, every year we get this really high indigenous population of Inoculation, and it's really hard to control. And oftentimes it finishes before primary. One thing you could do is do a co-inoculation, add a really high population of beta co-inoc 24 hours after your yeast. So you have a really high population of a known strain so that you can have a little more control over the process.
That's what I was going to say is, I've run into wineries, like I said in the past, where, they've had an endemic issue where something had happened, and over years it wasn't anybody's fault. It just happened. Maybe it was, the wine style of making they were doing for years. Anyways, they had produced basically an in-house, very aggressive lactic acid bacteria, Inococcus even, but it was also a VA producer, and it just wasn't really amenable to the styles of wines that we're trying to make. And so, we ended up, having discussions about co-inoculation. We had discussions about some proactive, and it was a multi-year stepped. You know what I mean? Like the first year was kind of like, well, why not try like a little lysozyme in the beginning of some of these lots? And we're talking trials basically, right? So, pull the stuff that's coming in, normal, put it aside, add some lysozyme to it, try and retard that behavior, and then maybe do that. And the other possibility I mentioned is, yeah, go ahead and do a co-inoc, right? Where you're just inoculating 24 hours after yeast, waiting till you get a couple of bricks drop, and then picking your own Inococcus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so vintage dependent, it seems, right?
Mhm.
Like it's just some years are worse than others. And it's,
Yeah.
I really do want to make sure if you have a slowly building, there's two things. You have a slowly building issue, right? Oh, it's getting worse. Oh, it's getting worse. Oh, you have a 1 year off, one versus an off year where you're like, everything's fine, everything's fine. And oh, shucks, this year is real bad. It's hard to pull that 1 year and go, I need to change everything. But if you're 1 year, you have one stuck, and then the next year you have two stucks, and then the next year you have three, and then it's like 50%, then it's 60%, then it's 80%. That is an endemic problem, and that's going to need a quite possibly a whole review of your cleaning procedures, a whole review of your inoculation content. It's all combined together into this kind of, thing so that you don't have to change your fundamental winemaking, right? To get to the point you got to pick earlier pHs and all this, or lower pHs.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, somebody actually, because Nicola broke up a little bit with that answer, restate the answer to the rescue versus autolyzed yeast question. The answer, as I understood, and Nicola can try and pipe in, but yeah, I think her connection was a little bad, is if it's yeast hulls, you're trying to do this detoxifying component, you're limited to 3 pounds per 1,000. But if you're using a product like Rescue, which is an autolyzed yeast product, it's CGMP, good manufacturing practices. So it's just got to use your common sense, but it's not going to be capped at that level. That makes sense? Is that what she said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what she said. And somebody thanks for the partial bottle on reduction of SO2 idea. Yeah, go for it. It doesn't hurt. Try that. My experience is that MLF is very sensitive to even slight changes in temperature. So while I would like to co-inoculate, my concern is that with primary finishing around 75, 85 Fahrenheit, that the MLF being conducted at 68, 69 Fahrenheit, I am concerned it will start leaving me with a low level Malic and therefore hard to restart. Am I better off just following the sequential approach? Good question.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great question. I mean,
it is.
Yeah, meaning that we don't really have a straightforward answer.
I know. I have a chart that if you want to email Darren or I can send to you that shows temperature and alcohol and where you need to keep the temperature depending on alcohol during a co-inoculation. I mean, you need to keep it fairly low if you have control.
Yeah.
But that is a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I am 100% behind that question. Like, totally gonna mess me up by consuming some of the Malic and then being stuck in a situation where it's so low that it's very difficult.
Right.
My experience with ML, and that's primary finishing at 78, meaning that it might have peaked at 80, 85 even. That with the right yeast and the right nutrient. And like do your homework with a co-inoc. This is something, this talk was more about, dealing with stucks, but co-inoculation is a whole nother, conversation, and do your homework. Make sure that, you've got a very nice malolactic fermentation compatible yeast. And
use a good nutrient strategy.
And yes. And so, but given that, and like I said, I've been using, Go Firm, Inifirm, Protect Evolution and Fermate O for years. So I'm more comfortable with doing a co-inoc, and most of the time, by the time my primary is done, my secondary is done too. So I haven't run into that concern where like you do have your primary done and then your secondary is still kind of leaning along. But there's plenty of other conversations out there. What I recommend folks doing though, always, is this coming year, if you haven't done a co-inoc, is try a couple. You can't compete with experience, right? Ani?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going on to the next question.
Yeah, no, trying to pull you back in.
Sorry about that.
No. Last question. What time frame would start to get concerned about a stuck ML fermentation? I have more than a dozen wines that have finished ML, but my Chardonnay hasn't. Yeah.
So it hasn't finished,
No.
and
Like,
so we'd start going through those questions, you know, where is the malic stuck at? What's the temperature? What's the free and total SO2? What's the alcohol?
What have you did? What's the number?
What
You
are
know,
the numbers?
Has it changed? What has it changed?
Right.
You know
What
I mean?
did it start out at? What is it now? Is it moving at all, or is it just stopped?
You know, in a large winery I worked at, we did MLs every week, enzymatically,
Mm-hmm.
because the lot sizes were 600,000 gallons,
Yeah.
so we couldn't afford waiting a week to
Right.
find out. But the answer to that question, honestly, I would recommend is that test it. If you're moving, you know, I'm less inclined to, invest in the restart, right? But maybe this is a good candidate. You know, if you don't want to do the testing, maybe this is a good candidate to just add that ML nutrient.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if all those things are okay, if the alcohol isn't too high, the pH isn't too low, free and total, all those, you know, you might try to just stir it and warm it up. If that doesn't work, you could try adding some rescue or ML Red Boost, stirring and warming it up. And if none of that works, then you might have to do the whole restart. And you can email me if you want.
Yeah, email us. You know, that's part of this too. Email us.
Yeah.
Look at your numbers as best you can. You know, try and keep it warm. I mean, this is all kind of stuff. Oh, one more question piped through. Does ML Red Boost have an effect on flavor aromatics? Is it stripping?
No, it's not stripping. I mean, to my palate.
Yeah, they do a
No.
bunch of sensory analysis over wines. It's very much
Yeah.
like, I mean, you expect Lallemand to do a bunch of beta testing before they ever introduce this stuff.
Yeah, if you're ever concerned, you could just, you know, just do a bench trial, but I have never heard anyone complain about that. And we hear a lot of complaints. No one ever calls and says things are fine. we only hear the complaints. So
yeah, that's one thing about these webinars, you know, and this kind of format, you know, I might do more, you know, occasionally is to because we do have like a kind of an ear to the ground how things are going. So yeah, we only hear about the bad stuff.
exactly. Hey, Darren, let's see those poll results.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm going to show the poll results. Does anybody else have any other questions? Don't hesitate to submit them now. Here's the poll results, and I'll share them right now. Testing SO2. Do you test free sulfur and total sulfur before adding malolactic bacteria? Number one answer, 47%, was no.
See? They don't.
Close behind.
But they're going to do it now.
Yes, it was yes, and then sometimes. So if you add sometimes with yes, maybe there's more than 40%. You know, but it looks almost evenly split.
Right.
Between the two. MLF scorecard. This is very interesting. I like this. What conditions do you think are most important when determining the ease of an ML fermentation? Number one answer, 79%, was temperature.
Yeah.
Which totally makes sense. Tied for second at 61% was pH and SO2. Very much so. Third factor at 50% was alcohol, then initial level malic acid, and then yeast nutritional needs at a very last 25%. But you know, honestly, you guys, that's great to see that some of
it is
are actually looking at that. I really do like to see that. That's nice to see. What ML bacteria? Last one. What ML bacteria have you used? Most of the folks that were answered today said VP41, then alpha, then 20% MBR31, then beta, then PN4, omega, and last but not least, silica. And
so silica's new, so it's great. I'm happy to see people trying it.
Yeah,
people have had really good results with it.
And then 12% said, I don't use good ML bacteria. That was a tongue-in-cheek question. I'm glad you answered it.
But you will start using good ML bacteria now.
Oh, and somebody just mentioned these webinars are super useful. Thank you for your comment. Yeah,
Great.
so yeah, we're always open for further conversations. This is not supposed to end conversations. These webinars are supposed to spark conversations. So don't hesitate. Darren M at scottlab.com, Annamarie, Ani, H at scottlab.com. You know, just shoot us a quick question, comment. If I used Opto Plus, do I still try rescue?
If you've already added it and that wasn't the problem, I mean, you might want it because rescue is absorptive, so it can be, you know, maybe there can be other issues. We need a few more answers about, you know, we're going to ask you more questions about that wine before answering that question, but you might try that, adding rescue. If you've already added Optimello Plus and nothing's happened, maybe it's something else.
Yeah. I mean, it can't, you know, the thing about rescue, I just like it. It's just not, it's not harmful. You know what I mean?
I know. It's a really gentle thing to try. And I tell people all the time, you know, just try it. We're not just trying to sell you something just so that you're buying something from us. It really is such a good product. I mean, it just has been a game changer in the last couple of years, people using it for stuck primaries and stuck MLs. And sluggish. Just getting them to go through.
I mean, with stuck MLs or stuck fermentations for that matter, you know, maybe guys who sell VA removal. You know? I mean, horrified with some bad stuck ML or stuck for primary fermentations situations where I ended up spending a lot of money in VA removal. Or at least
right.
Well, that's it, you guys. Thank you again. I can't stress enough. I really do appreciate it. I really do mean it. We're coming up to the holidays, and thank you again. Thanks for please, if we do have a survey, please submit your answers. We always are moving up upcoming topics, and don't hesitate to reach out to any of us with comments, because we are trying to continually improve. My email is darren@scottlab.com. You see Ani's email. We posted the webinars on our website, so you could just Google Scott Labs webinars. It'll show up. And thank you so much.
Yes.
We all want to say happy holidays. Hopefully this will be a great holiday because you're done with ML.
That's right.
Well, thanks, guys. Thank you again. Don't hesitate.
Thank you.
And can they get the slideshow?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sure.
Yes, we'll try and post that online. We haven't done that quite yet because we're going through a redesign, but we're gonna, if you need the slideshow, reach out to me or Ani and we'll get you that PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, I can send you the quick test. I can send you the scorecard. I can send you the presentation. Just email me and I'll get you what you need.
You know what? We love the phone calls, love the emails. Don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, we do want to help. Thank you, Ani.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Darren.
Awesome. Thank you.
See ya. Bye.
Have a good one.